Welcome to the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies. We are very pleased today to welcome His Excellency Peter Ammon, Ambassador of Germany to the United States. We welcome all of you not only here in the Kennedy Center conference room, but in the overflow in the foyer, and I also understand that this is being screened in our Kennedy Center Advisement Office, as well as on the Kennedy Center's IPTV channel across campus. This lecture is also broadcast live on BYU's Sirius XM channel 192 to our alumni around the world, and will be available online through our podcast at iTunes and on the Kennedy Center website. We're glad that you found us here today and that you're here to participate in this very important lecture. My name is Corey Leonard. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Kennedy Center. We want to welcome you here and also encourage you to get involved in the Center for the Study of Europe's two-day conference starting tomorrow in the Hinckley Center. The conference is titled, Europe in a Nutshell, Will It Crack? It is a conference designed primarily for students with top experts and faculty in discussion panel format. They will be discussing various current issues that are currently facing Europe. There are handouts available at the back of the room on your way out, or you can find more information on the Center for the Study of Europe's website. If that's not enough incentive alone to go to the conference, every session that you attend, you will be entered once again for a contest to win a free study abroad airfare. So if you were wondering how you were going to make ends meet on your German study abroad this summer, this is your way. And so we look forward to seeing you tomorrow all day long at the Hinckley Center, and on Friday at the Moot Court room 303 of the J. Reuben Clark building. We would like to begin today's lecture, as is our custom, with an opening prayer. We've invited Professor Hans Wilhelm Kelling, former coordinator of European Studies and professor of Germanic languages, to offer our opening prayer. And then I'll be pleased to turn the time over to Charles Dahlquist, Utah's honorary consul for Germany here in Utah, and he will introduce His Excellency. Hans.
Our Father in heaven, we are grateful indeed to be at this university that gives us opportunities to hear from men and women who are influential in religion and in politics and in culture. We're grateful to have the German ambassador with us. We ask thee to bless him, that he may be able to express the ideas and thoughts that he has prepared for us, and to bless us that we may have an open heart and mind, that we can understand what he's telling us. We know, Heavenly Father, these are indeed challenging and times that we live in, and we realize that Europe is an important part in Germany of the relationship that we have with our country, and we ask for thy understanding and thy blessings in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Well, I'm pleased to be with you, and what a way to start this with Dr. Kelling starting this out. I just have to tell you, our daughter Heather would want to be remembered by you. She said getting a C in Dr. Kelling's class is better than getting an A in any other German class. Well, I am honored. I'm the honorary consul for Germany for the state of Utah, and I'm honored to introduce to you Ambassador Peter Ammon and his wonderful wife, Marlisa. We're going to hear from the ambassador, but Marlisa, would you please stand up so that they can see you? We're delighted to have her here. Let me just tell you, this is a delightful couple. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ambassador's background, but can you imagine an ambassador and his wife that invite people over to their home to sing around the piano? We talked about this. We decided that they had the modern-day hootenanny right inside the German embassy, and so this is a great person. Plus, he loves Bob Dylan, which says a little bit about him, especially for those of us that remember who Bob Dylan was without having to go to a history book. Ambassador Ammon holds a degree in economics from Berlin's Freie University. He has wonderful close ties to the United States, and I will just tell you that I think there's no time when the United States should look east to Germany to learn the lessons of what's happening as far as the stabilization of Europe and what Angela Merkel has done and what this great government has done to stabilize a very unstable situation. From 1999 to 2001, he served at the German embassy in Washington as the economic minister. In 2007 to 2008, he was appointed as the German ambassador to Paris, France. Prior to that, he had been in London and in Senegal and New Delhi. He was the head of policy and planning and a speechwriter to the German president in the Präsidialamt from 1996 to 1999. He's a staunch advocate for free trade, and I think you will find that he is not only a great speaker, but that he is someone who can answer your questions, because at a time when everybody is looking to a global economy, it's wonderful to be able to understand it from those who have grown up in Germany, which is a wonderful free state. The ambassador and Mrs. Ammon have two grown daughters, Ariana and Christina. His personal interests include regular fitness workouts, which none of us get quite as much as we would like to, hiking in nature's beauty, and listening to music and poetry. I think this will be a wonderful hour, and so I am honored to introduce to you Ambassador Peter Ammon. And Ambassador, I introduce to you one of the finest student bodies in the world. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Ammon.
Thank you so much, Consul Dahlquist, for these very kind words and all the exaggerations I heard. I could hear them again. Vice Director Leonhard, Dr. Killing, dear students, I'm delighted and honored to be here with you at the David M. Kennedy Center for International Studies. And when I came here and prepared myself for this talk, I learned that about 10% of the people of Utah have German roots. And in a way, I feel that I have here many distant cousins among you. And I was also told on the way here that you have a international interest and international experiences. So may I just ask you to raise your hand, who has been abroad of you? Almost everybody. I think this is extremely impressive. Who speaks a foreign language? Wow, that's great. Somebody speaks German? Okay, I will not continue in German, but I'm delighted that you have such a wonderful interest in my country. And as a German ambassador to Washington, I can tell you the last months I spent mainly with explaining the German position in the Euro crisis and what's happening in our activity in the Arab world and the transatlantic economic relationship and how we deal with the events in Afghanistan. So when I prepared myself for this, I thought maybe I'd take a totally different approach and try to look or invite you to have a short look back into history. And if you look back, let's say, to the end of the 19th century, the world was ruled by the British Empire. America was a rising power, but it was still beyond the horizon. People in Europe thought that this was Indian country. And Germany was, at the time, the country with the highest growth rates and poised to overtake Britain as the largest economy in the world. And it also became the largest military power. So this was a situation which many people today compare with the rise of China today. So, and of course, this memory of this distant past can cause concern. What happened at the time? European economies in around 1900 showed already an early form of globalization. There was a lot of trade. A huge part of the GDP at the time was traded across borders. People could travel in Europe without passports. People are not aware of that today so much. There was a gold standard, so you could trade in a way with a single currency. And nobody had an interest that war should break out. There was an interest that this growth could go on and peace would prevail. But in August 1914, there was a mishandling of a diplomatic crisis. And people who, who called themselves diplomats really caused the greatest disaster in the world at the time. They led Europe in a war that nobody wanted. And the war killed millions of people. It killed the elite of Europe at the time. The best and brightest disappeared in this war. It brutalized societies, and the brutalization of society which followed was also laid the groundwork for the Second World War that came afterwards. And some historians say that these two world wars together are just one war. It is a 30 years war in Europe. And at the end of the war, the predominant role of Europe in the world was finished. The Second World War, you all know, killed 50 million people, and the greatest crime in history, the Holocaust, was part of that story. And at the end of it, it was America that emerged not only as a victorious power, but the country that would rule the world for the decades to come. It was American, not only the military victory of America, but it was the foresightedness, the generosity, remember the Marshall Plan, and the will to implement ideas in Europe, the idea of democracy, of free market, of tolerance. And through this American, I would say, great achievement in around the middle of the 20th century, about the time when I was born, the second half of the 20th century became a century of peace and prosperity. And I can tell you, I was born in 1952, and my earliest memory still is walking through Frankfurt, my birth town, at my father's hand. And I still remember that my first memory I have is a town totally destroyed. And if you go to Frankfurt now, obviously some of you have, you will find a modern, thriving city. And of course, we can only be happy that we were able to come such a long way. Of course, the second half of the 20th century was the century of a Cold War, of German division. And there's a book title now of a book coming out in Washington, says Berlin was the most dangerous place on earth at the time. So you had American troops, about 250,000, confronting Soviet shock troops on the other side of the Berlin Wall. War could break out any minute. When I was in your age, I remember that we felt fairly insecure because we thought that war could really literally break out any minute, and some diplomatic mishandling, and I spoke of diplomatic mishandling before, could simply destroy everything. It would be the end of the world we knew. But again, America decided to stay engaged, not withdraw, and in the end, America prevailed. And I would say if America had withdrawn from Europe, we would have seen Soviet preponderance over the whole of Europe, Western Europe, and I bet that the Soviet Union would not have collapsed, and the world would look totally different today. So it was American perseverance again that changed the world and brought us to a point today which we all can only say we were happy to have. In 1989, it was the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and the ideas, the American ideas of freedom, democracy, free market, were so powerful that people in the East dared to stand up against the secret police and the state to ask for freedom. And then in the 1990s, we, with American help, created structures in the East that cemented peace, freedom, market economy. It was the extension of the European Union to the East. We now have 27 members. And NATO was expanded to the East, up to the Baltic states. And this is an enormous achievement of carefully crafted diplomacy. And I think future historians will look back at the time and say that this was a wonderful achievement. And in some of the European states, 17 of them have even adopted a common currency, the euro. And this, of course, is something which is much in the media today. But whatever you think of it, you should know all this, what I said earlier, because the euro is not just a thing of convenience. It's not something that some economists have dreamt up. This is the crown of a political process. So this is much more to us than just a technical question. The euro is something that we really have achieved, coming a very long way, and always looking into an abyss that you, of course, have never known, but we have seen in Europe. So, at the end of the 1990s, I'm slowly coming to the present, you notice. End of the 1990s was a time when globalization set in. And globalization had enormous effects, globalization, free trade. More than 500 million people were lifted out of poverty through globalization. Most of these 500 million live in China. So with it came the rise of China, and with it the growing importance of China. This process of globalization led to a new division of labor in the world. Cheap labor was easily available and led to a phenomenon which people called outsourcing. It means companies found that work could be done outside of America, outside of Europe, by a cheaper workforce. And this, of course, made these companies more productive, but it meant, on the other hand, that companies in Europe, in America, lost jobs. The German unification, which came in parallel at the time, had even another burden to carry. That was the fact that East Germany had was an economic basket case at the time. The communist government had ruined the structures and the industry existing in East Germany, and we had to rebuild it almost from scratch. And the sums needed to reinvest in East Germany were astronomical. We counted it, and we now stand at $2 trillion. So $2 trillion were taken from the West Germans, brought to East Germany to rebuild the country. And when you travel in East Germany now, you will find the motorways and the infrastructure and everything more modern than in the West. Some people in the West resent that, by the way. So now we are at the beginning of the millennium. Of course, September 11th was one milestone or one marker, the onset of a war in Afghanistan. And just let me say in this context, when America came under attack on September 11th, it called on its allies to go with it against Al-Qaeda. And if you see who is fighting with you in Afghanistan, you find that 80% of the troops there, the non-American troops, are European troops, although Afghanistan is fairly far away from Europe. So when America needed support, when it asked for its allies, it was the Europeans that came with you, and not other countries that lie closer to Afghanistan. Today, and now I'm almost at the present, today Germany sees itself as a winner of globalization. We have in Germany now the lowest unemployment ever, and despite the financial crisis, we have positive growth. The reason for that is something that finds a lot of, I get asked about it quite often, and I think a short-term explanation is that we have in Germany a number of small and mid-sized companies that are technology champions in their fields, and some of them are world champions with dominant niche markets, and it's quite usual for a German company to export 90% of its production. So Germany is now the biggest exporter in the world, right behind China, and we we create jobs abroad. We have in America, through German investment alone, created 750,000 jobs. 750,000 jobs. That's quite a lot. Again, I ask my American friends how many jobs have been created here through Chinese investments so far. It's a fraction of that. A special element of this German success story is that we didn't outsource whole companies. That's what happened here in America. When a company here thought it could produce cheaper elsewhere, it took the whole company out and rebuilt it in Malaysia or in China or somewhere else. We didn't do this. We created production chains or production networks. So what when you look at our statistics, you find we are one of the biggest exporters in the world, but we are also one of the biggest importers. When we build a car, for example, the engine is probably made in Hungary, and the transmission in Portugal. If it's a BMW X5, it's assembled in America for the world market and then resold, let's say, in Germany or in China. And these are structures that are more complex than just farming out business totally abroad, like many American companies have done. So we have created networks across the world. And the other day I spoke to the BMW people, and they proudly told me, or they asked me, who is the biggest exporter of American-made cars? And I said, I don't know. They said, well, it's BMW. We wouldn't think that. They are exporting more cars made here in America than Ford, GM, or Chrysler do. So we have a certain structure built which made us, as I said, winners of globalization, but this is not an exclusive thing. I think others can follow. Another element which made us successful is that we have, around the year 2000, put an emphasis on education and technology. So around the year 2000, after all the money we had to spend in East Germany, we were in a crisis. And the decision was made then that we should, in dire straits, take the money we have and put it into education and technology. And this is now paying off. So we have, as I said, moved from crisis to crisis to crisis. We're still going strong. And the crisis which affects us now is the debt crisis. It is a crisis which is affecting not only Europe, but it's affecting the whole Western world. If you look at the macroeconomic statistics, you will find that America has, if you could take all levels of government, also the states and municipal level, you have about, this is an IMF figure, 10% GDP deficit in your public expenditure. You stand at 100% GDP debt. The European figure is about 80% debt and 8% deficit. So the European figures are slightly better than the American figures. The reason why the crisis blew up in Europe and not here is that you are a unified country. We don't have the political union yet in Europe, which you have here. And this, of course, has created more trust in the markets, in the dollar, than in the euro. But it's all about trust. And by the way, I heard a nice joke the other day by someone who said, do you have an example of the euro and the dollar? Why is the euro and the dollar not in the same boat? And he said, it's like a man named Euro and a man named Dollar running away from a hungry tiger. And so the Euro asks the Dollar, do you think we can outrun the tiger? And the Dollar answers, as long as I can outrun you, it's okay. So we are in a situation where the whole world has accumulated too much debt. And the reason for this is clear. I think there was a long period, a decade of cheap money. High Chinese savings made money available at low rates. Interest rates were set low, and in Europe, some countries have went to extensive borrowing. Some, in particular, in the southern periphery of Europe, these countries or these governments borrowed money to please their voters. That was a very simple process. And now, as we discover that borrowing has come to a limit, they went above their credit card limit, so to speak. They have to cut down, and this is a politically very difficult process. You see demonstrations in Greece, for example, just today, and this is a tough process to be handled politically. It's a process called deleveraging. It's also happening in the private sector, and we know from experience that deleveraging after a financial crisis is a lengthy process which brings long periods of slow growth. We have seen this in Japan, for example, after the 1990s. So we have been through this deleveraging process, and I spoke to Secretary Geithner the other day, and he said in America we are 2/3 through the project, through the deleveraging process. So we are almost at the end of this painful period. And I would say the same about Europe. We have, in a way, made in Europe a grand bargain, which is not very much understood here in America. The grand bargain is the following. The South European countries who are now beyond their credit card limits, so to speak, and nobody will lend them any money anymore on the market, they will get the money from the north, from the northern countries in Europe, in particular from Germany. But we will do this not forever, but we put a timeline on them. We said, we'll borrow you money so you get time to reform. You have to do some reforms, and you know, when you really look in the details, you find that Greece, for example, had no tax collection system worth the name. They had no land registry. They had pensioners who were 130 years old, and they claimed it's on a good climate. But these reforms are hitting vested interests, so it is a tough process to reform, but it's a tough bargain. The bargain, as I said, is we buy you time, and you have time. You must use this time to reform. If you don't reform, the money will stop. So this is, in a way, the process which is taking place in Germany and in Europe, and it is a politically difficult process, but I think it's working. And the latest economic data we have from the crisis states in Europe are encouraging. For example, Greece in August, for the first time, had what we call a primary surplus. So it lived within its means, to shorthand. And and Italy is going to have a balanced budget by next year, probably. So the markets are rediscovering these countries. Their trust is coming back, and you can see it that the value of the euro compared to the dollar has gone up about 10% over the last month or so. This is a show that these two people running away from a hungry tiger. You see, one is now one is gaining ground on the other. I think that there is a lot of reason for optimism. There is a lot of negative press because, in particular, in the financial media, which come from London, because there are many people in the banking world who have a bet against the euro, who shortened the euro, and they now feel threatened. So don't believe everything you find in what you read in the Financial Times these days. There is a strategy out of the doldrums, and this strategy is showing good results and it's working. So, but beyond that, you should know there is something much more than just economic strategy. There's something that goes very deep, and that's why I started 100 years ago. This policy, this strategy has a basis, a political basis in in Europe and in the voters in Germany that makes them ready to pay up these large sums. We have now, Germany has invested about $250 billion in the southern rim countries in Europe. And the taxpayer, of course, is not so happy about this. And as I said, if you compare this with America, the American economy is 4 times the German economy. So if you multiply this by 4, you would say, imagine America coughing up $1 trillion to save a neighboring country. This is something you would only do when you really have a good reason for it, and we do. So I want you to go away from this meeting with a feeling of optimism about Europe, and I believe that the doomsayers will prove wrong, and I'm optimistic about Europe and the euro, and let me just add one last word. I'm also optimistic about the United States. Thank you very much. Yeah, please.
So the ambassador has time for a few questions. We would just ask that you please raise your hand and wait for the microphone since we're recording, and then tell us your name and what you're studying so we know who you are.
My name is Jonathan Tomasini, and I'm still a bit undecided with my major. But I'm originally from France, and I was wondering what your opinion was on François Hollande and his politics, which seemed a little bit in opposition to what Angela Merkel wanted to apply to Europe, and how do you see the future of France with the politic he's trying to implement?
J'ai vécu en France, et c'est un peuple très intelligent. So I'm not worried about France, and I'm not. I believe that the government in France has to has to follow a very difficult path, because it has to maintain the support of the voters, who are, of course, hate swallowing a bitter medicine. The bitter medicine is, of course, longer life, work plans, retirement with 65, not 62, or even 67, probably like in Germany now. So these are very unpopular things, and when you talk to the French in private, they all understand the situation. They all understand that as we all live longer, as we have to pay more for our medicine when we are old, and some certain realities are unavoidable, we have to work longer. And the problem now is how to sell the bad news to my people. And French politicians know how to do this. And I'm very confident that we will.
My name is Tyler Potts. I'm majoring in biophysics. And I'm just wondering, what's Germany's position, or what are they going to do about the nuclear crisis that's going on in Iran right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, Germany is one of the 6 countries that are leading the negotiating process with Iran. These are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany, the P5+1. And we believe that, first, as Ms. Merkel has said this quite clearly, a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable to us. And secondly, we think that there is still room and time for a diplomatic process. Germany was the country inside Europe that made the sanction process go forward. Before I came here to Washington, I was just working on that in Berlin. We pushed our partners to impose tough sanctions. America has always had trade sanctions on Iran. So these sanctions did not really work or hurt the Iranians because there was so much alternative in the world to trade with. Now, as Europe is imposing an oil embargo and other hard, tough trade sanctions on Iran, they really feel the pain. You can see it on certain economic indicators. For example, the value of their currency, the rial, has dropped to a third of its value. This is a country which imports most of its foodstuff and refined gasoline and these things. They have a huge bill to pay, and they can't. So they feel the pain, and we will go further with our sanctions if they don't move forward. Now everybody is waiting for the American elections, so you cannot expect them to show their hand before the elections. But I'm sure that they will think strongly about the alternatives. And so I think we should give the diplomatic process some more time.
My name is Coulter Anderson. I'm majoring in German and economics. And it was mentioned in your introduction that you are an advocate for free trade.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a big topic nowadays in the American government. And I was just wondering, like, what your opinions are on that, and what are Germany's policies with that?
Mm-hmm. You see, free trade is something that is always easy a victim of politics. Once you open your borders, and of course you open the ways to a new division of labor in the world through it, somebody has to, somebody feels a certain pain, but overall the gain is much bigger. But those who feel a little pain because their business is disappearing have usually some political clout. And once the political process is difficult, and it is difficult in America as it is in Europe, then of course free trade can easily become victim of politics. And it needs strong leadership to move forward to a freer trade. I believe personally that we need an initiative for a free trade arrangement between Europe and America. I think this is something I would hope we will see in the next government cycle. Whoever becomes president, I hope that there will be an initiative in this direction, because in the end, free trade makes us all richer.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us. I'm Paul Carey, an associate professor of history here at the university. I was very interested in your account, very brief account leading up to the present, what you said about the brutalization of society and how that could lay in a sense, the moral groundwork or the lack of a moral groundwork that could lead to World War II, and also your account of optimism. My question is, often optimism is expressed traditionally, one can see it demographically.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, during the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle, families flourished. If we're now at a point of optimism and Germany believes in its future, what is happening in Germany and indeed severely in many parts of Europe with the so-called demographic winter? Will families continue to flourish? Will populations continue to grow? Usually a sign of optimism in one's future.
Mm-hmm. This is a very good question, and I can't answer it. It's it goes very deep and to the soul of the people, and I could speculate a bit, but we, as I said, we have seen quite many crises, and an economist says we have been under one economic shock after the other. The introduction of the euro was a shock. Unification was a shock. Globalization was a shock. September 11th was a shock. Now the euro crisis, the financial crisis, 2007 was a shock. Maybe people are, in a way, afraid. And this optimism is, the optimism which flourishes a bit in the economic sector of the society has not somehow expanded into the private lives and families. But this is only an answer, a very superficial answer, and I can't really give you a precise analysis. Yeah.
My name is Brian Priest. I'm studying Russian. You said that Europe isn't as unified as the United States is yet. I was kind of wondering, what is Angela Merkel and the CDU's desire for how federalized Europe might become?
Mm-hmm. Again, a very good question. When the crisis hit us, we were a bit worried in the beginning, as we have no textbook answers. Once most people who have studied economics couldn't find a recipe in the textbooks. And now as I said, we are now working ourselves out of the crisis. And I would say in the last 3 months or so, the mood has changed a bit. And we are thinking that we should take advantage of the crisis. You know, the old Chinese saying that in every good crisis there lies a chance. And European integration had also come into a lull. There was some people were disappointed with the Lisbon Treaty and said, well, Lisbon Treaty took us 10 years to negotiate, and then we had 2 referenda in Europe which failed, and people are so unhappy with it. We will not go deeper into European integration. And now we see that the economic and financial crisis forces us to go into deeper integration. You may have read about something which is called the Fiscal Compact, and this is something which you have here in the United States. Here in the United States, most states, federal states, have a proviso in their constitution which requires a balanced budget. And we don't have this in Europe yet. But part of the grand deal we make with the peripheral countries is that they introduce such a proviso in their constitution. These countries must have a balanced budget from the year, I think, 2014 onwards. So this is a huge step towards deeper integration, which would have been impossible before.
My name is Stephen Smoot, and I'm studying history as well as German. And I'm wondering, when the European Union or the different European nations look at the economic policies of Barack Obama as opposed to Mitt Romney, our 2 presidential candidates, which one do they look more favorably towards? Which one do they think will be more beneficial for European economic interests and also European-American economic relations, the policies of Obama or Mitt Romney?
I think you want me to come back one day here as an ambassador. Sorry, I can't answer that question.
My name is Tim Colvin. I'm studying advertising. I just wanted to ask, so you'd mentioned that Germany's been investing a lot into the southern countries. What date did you give them to pay back, and how are they going to be paying you guys back?
Oh. Well, it is a very complicated, negotiated contract, and I think I can't really give you a precise date. It's not what we see, for example, in Greece now, and this is the most urgent case. We have the Greeks are now coming up, I think, just this week, with another bill of about 30 billion, which is uncovered. So we will have to extend their debt, prolong their debt for another period to another 30 million. By the way, this insecurity creates a lot of unrest in the public debate in Germany. People ask you the same question you ask, and the government cannot give you a precise answer. But they have bonds which are 10 years long. They have bonds that are 3 years long. So they become due at a certain cascade in time, and well, we try to keep them solvent. We try to keep them afloat, and when we will come back to the market, I don't know, 2 years, 3 3 years, probably.
Paul Hedengren, Emeriti faculty in philosophy. Disappointment about the safety of nuclear reactors has caused their closure in many countries. We notice in Japan, they close them, pull the cores, and move them to a military facility. What safeguards are taken with the spent fuel in Germany when you close your reactors?
Well, this is a huge issue in Germany. And we have, after the Fukushima catastrophe, decided to move out of nuclear energy altogether. So we've closed down 8 reactors immediately, although people say they were up to the mark and fairly modern ones. And we will phase out the rest of the reactors over the next 7 years now, I think. Which means that we have to rebuild our electricity supply, and we are investing heavily in alternative energies, renewable energies. Just to make you laugh again, Germany is a very cloudy and rainy country compared to here in particular. But in Germany today already you have more than 50% of the world's solar cells installed. And we have wind generators, wind turbines all over the place. Those of you who have traveled in Germany must have seen it. There's already a movement against it because people say they spoil the view. But of course, you know, the electricity consumption is not constant over the day and over the year. And we had, in summer at least, a period when we had so much solar-produced electricity in the country that the spot market price for 1 kilowatt hour became negative. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Sorry, I didn't even